Hi, I'm Larry Gerston, Professor Emeritus of Political Science at San Jose State University. In today's discussion, we've got three objectives. First, we're going to explore the meaning of political authority. Second, with that in place, we will examine the exercise of political authority in a democratic society versus the exercise of political authority in a non-democratic society. Last, we'll consider the benefits and the limits of political authority in a democratic society, because of course there can be lots of things that go right and wrong even under the best of circumstances. So let's begin with the first question. What is political authority? Well, to understand this, we really need to consider these words both separately and in combination. So we start with the term political. Political focuses on the struggles for scarce resources and competing values by the members of a society or country. The struggle can be over lots of things. It can be between individuals or groups. It can be between whites versus non-whites, an ethnic type of division. It can be between rich and poor, old versus young, as well as countless other sources of division. The struggle may be peaceful or violent, ranging from writing a political official a letter asking him or her to do something or not to do something, to forceful confrontations in the streets. The struggle may be temporary or ongoing, from working to fix a contained, narrow political issue to questioning the legitimacy of policymakers. The bottom line is simply this: anything political centers on the struggle for some kind of scarce resource. Let's look at the second word for a second: authority. Now, authority centers on the holder of power, the one or ones with the capability to manage the allocation of scarce resources to those who demand it, or who are in disagreement over what should or should not be done. Now, when we speak about authority, we're looking at resources here, and the resources, how they're used, by whom. They may be about jobs, they may be about land, education opportunities, government contracts, the ability to travel, almost anything that people are demanding or expecting from the holders of power. When we talk about authority, the holder of that authority may be chosen by the governed. Alternatively, the holder may be empowered by force, perhaps a coup, some kind of tradition, or other non-democratic means by which that person or persons holds power. Regardless, because of his or her position to make decisions, the holder of authority, exercises control of the polity through his or her ability to impose coercion. Yes, coercion, the ability to force somebody to do something, to require something, to comply. The ability of a police officer, for example, to arrest someone suspected of a crime. Not everybody can do that, but the holders of authority can, especially if it's legitimate authority, which we'll get to in a minute. So combined, we look at political and authority. And these two words now take on a very powerful meaning. They become a potent concept that blends power with the distribution of resources. Now, the person or persons who wields political authority will have the ability to determine the flow of those resources and the distribution of power. The person or persons who wields political authority also will have the coercive abilities to extract assets or force compliance from society in the form of taxes, military service, or countless other obligations of the citizens. With political authority, one has the ability to govern, the tools to govern, if you will, although such rule may or may not be legitimate. So that takes us to the distinction between democratic authority and non-democratic authority. Now, with democratic authority, an ongoing interdependence exists between the people and those who govern. Those in power are put there through elections, and as such, they serve at the pleasure of the people who put them in power. Now, in a democratic society, the power of those who govern is determined by rules that the governors must honor. The rules for governing are codified in a document. Sometimes it's called a constitution. Might be called a basic law, as it is in Germany, or other names that in one way or another defines the rules by which all must comply. Now, those rules may be changed only by a process established in the document. Power is commonly divided vertically, sometimes between a nation and provinces, maybe even local governments. Power could also be divided horizontally, the separation of powers, if you will, between a legislative branch and an executive branch, maybe between a prime minister and a president. Courts might be involved as well. Okay? Any number of ways. But the point is, in a democratic system, nobody has too much power. And in a democratic society, the laws, the rules, the traditions, if you will, of governing take precedence over those individuals tasked with governing. We must remember, in a democratic society, the rules are permanent. The leaders are temporary. Finally, in a democratic society, ultimate authority resides not with the rulers. Ultimate authority resides with the people, the sovereign, if you will. The people, the power to govern in a democratic society is conferred by the people. Now, non-democratic societies come in several forms, but they boil down really to two types: totalitarian civilian societies and or military rule, or authoritarian monarchies. Now, we're excluding some monarchies here, let's say those in Great Britain or Spain or even Thailand, for example. Why? Because these monarchies are largely symbolic, and the holders of, quote, power, unquote, really have little power other than symbolic power. They're people who we look up to, but they can't really get things done. Others do things instead. So you could have a society that's totalitarian, but also have a monarchy as well. But it's little more than coding, okay? The totalitarian societies are managed by one person, or in some cases, a small group of persons. The authoritarian monarchies are run sometimes by kings or queens or other royal figures who have power handed to them arbitrarily, really because of their hierarchical or historical birth orders. That's it. You're first in line, your father's the king, and you happen to be the king after he dies. Just like that. Not because you deserve it, not because people have chosen you, but because you inherited it. It's automatic, and nobody has any say over it. Either way, non-democratic societies, whether they're totalitarian or and civilian societies or totalitarian monarchies, non-democratic societies are not accountable to the citizens. There's no linkage there. The decisions and actions taken by those in power are not subject to question or public approval. Now, in these non-democratic societies, there are few rights or guarantees for the governed. Moreover, the rules, such as they exist, may be changed at any time by those in power to fit the needs of the people in power. So governance, as we know, is autocratic. It's autocratic because people change the rules as they go along. And if a rule gets in their way, that rule is put aside. And if they need a new rule in place of that, they'll put it in by themselves. The people have no say over these things. As such, in totalitarian societies, there is no legitimacy. Now, unlike democratic societies, non-democratic societies tend to consolidate power among the rulers. There are no checks, there are no balances, there are no countervailing sources of power. Nobody can stop them. In non-democratic societies, the transfer of power is not public. It's a private affair, either done through some sort of internal combustion, let's say a coup or something like that, or in the case of a monarchy, by birth order. So note the key differences for a moment here between political authority in a democratic society versus a non-democratic society. We walk away with the following. We note the role of the people is very different. We note that there's a lack of permanent rules in non-democratic society, and very permanent rules in a democratic society. And finally, we want to remember that there's a difference here when we talk about accountability. Accountability exists in democratic societies. It doesn't exist in those societies that are not democratic. So when we talk about democratic society, we may walk away and say, wow, this is terrific. Everything's wonderful. It's the perfect system. Well, maybe, maybe not. In fact, there are benefits and there are some limits of political authority, even in a democratic society. Let's look for a moment at the benefits. Elections in a democratic society, yes, they assure a connection, a direct connection, between the people's will and those who govern them. Sometimes that connection can be somewhat indirect, as it is in the United States, when we vote for the president. We don't vote for the president per se, we vote for what they call electors, and the electors then honor the public will in each state and then choose the president. It works. It's a little cumbersome, but it works. And we call that in this country a representative democracy. So it's a version of it, but the fact of the matter is there's still a connection between the people and the rulers. More often, we see more direct connections in places like Great Britain, France, numerous democracies around the world, where the people just vote for president, or vote for prime minister, or they vote for their parties, which then come together in coalitions to select a president or a prime minister. Either way, elections in democracies preserve the linkage between the governors and the governed. Now, the rules in place in a democracy help to assure that those in power will operate within and by those rules. They are bound to those rules. They cannot change those rules on their own in any whimsical fashion. Elected leaders may well be replaced at the next election if they don't come through, if they fail to live up to the public's expectations, or for that matter, if the public's just tired of them. And in a democratic society, when that election takes place, the next people come in who are elected, and those who have lost the election walk away. They leave without a fight. In democracies, people have a real say over their destiny. Even when they disagree, their disagreements are worked out in elections peacefully and by the results of those they choose to govern. But there are limits, yes, there are limits even in democracies. Sometimes there are clashes, serious clashes over values, the right to free speech and the need to protect the citizenry from harm, or the rights of those who have suffered discrimination in the past versus the rights of those who feel no need to offer help to those people because that discrimination doesn't exist now. Or the rights of women is a common one over their bodies versus the rights of the unborn. These are some very difficult value clashes, and they're hard to resolve, and sometimes they can't be resolved. Sometimes leaders, confirmed by people through elections, abuse the public trust as well. Think of somebody like President Richard Nixon. And when that happened, what happened was that there was a system to remove the president, but it was painful. It was painful for Congress. It was painful for Americans. It was even painful for President Nixon. But the fact of the matter is, he did leave office peacefully. He left office peacefully, even though it took a while for everything to get sorted out. And when we speak of the people, here's another point. Sometimes the people just don't do their due diligence. Yes, even in a democracy. That is, they don't learn the issues. They don't become involved enough. They don't take part in the democratic process. They don't exercise the franchise when they have the opportunity. And sometimes small groups of people refuse, even in democracy, to accept the decisions of the majority. And when that unfortunate incident or incidents occur, somehow those in power have to find a way to show those who are rejecting the decisions of the many that they have to go along with it. And that's not always easily done. So we look at this whole discussion and we conclude a couple of important things. Yes, there are differences between democracies and non-democracies. But even in democracies are messy. They're not neat little packages where everything goes perfectly. They've got issues, they've got problems, they've got people who are human. Some of you err, some of you sometimes break the rules. Which takes to the second point, democracies aren't perfect. They're just not. No government system is. Democracies sometimes go awry, but usually the betrayal of public trust can be corrected because of the rules in place. All of this can end with a reminder given to us by Winston Churchill, who, when asked about democracy, once said, "Yes, it has been said that democracy is the worst form of government, except all the others that have been tried." And with that in mind, when we consider democracies versus non-democracies, we must honor those differences and go from there.
اگر بارها دنبال واژه آموزش گشته اید ولی با درهای بسته روبرو شده اید، اگر دنبال آموزشکده‌ای گشته اید که دور نباشد و استادهای خوبی هم داشته باشد، اگر مشتاق آموختن هستید اما توانایی مالی کافی نداشته اید که بیشتر و بیشتر بخوانید و بدانید، اگر شبها وقت آزاد دارید و روزها نمیتوانید دنبال درس و کلاس بروید، توانا بهترین انتخاب شماست. توانا بود هر که دانا بود. توانا رایگان در اختیار شماست. آموزشکده‌ای در خانه شماست. هر وقت که بخواهید، شب یا روز. با درس‌هایی مانند حق و حقوق زنان، دموکراسی، تفسیرهای نوین و لیبرال از دین، حقوق اقلیت‌ها، حکومت قانون، نهادسازی و نهادهای مدنی، محیط زیست، روزنامه نگاری و امنیت فضای مجازی و موبایل‌های هوشمند. آموزشکده توانا کلاس‌های دلخواه شما را رایگان به منزل شما می‌آورد. در کلاس‌های توانا با نام و جیمیل مستعار ثبت نام کنید. برای ما مهم انگیزه شهروندی و علاقه شما به آموختن است. ما هرگز نام واقعی شما را نمی‌پرسیم. تیم فنی توانا از طریق سایت تواناتک به شما کمک می‌کند تا با خیال راحت و فارغ از دردسرهای امنیت وب در کلاس‌ها شرکت کنید. در توانا بیاموزید، با تواناتک پاسخ سوال‌های فنی خود را بگیرید و از صدها کتاب، ویدئو، آدیو و مدرک دیجیتال در کتابخانه توانا رایگان استفاده کنید. توانا پنجره آشنایی شما با جهان ایده‌های نو و تجربه مردم دیگر کشورها در گذار به دموکراسی. برای دسترسی به توانا و اطلاعات بیشتر به فیسبوک، توییتر، یوتیوب و گوگل پلاس توانا و تواناتک بپیوندید.